It is among the most lethal poisons that man is currently aware of, because ricin is such a poison. At just 3 milligrams, which is equivalent to 1/10 of a teaspoon, is sufficient to cause the death of a human being. Once it has been refined, it is odorless and tasteless, and it can be easily incorporated into food or water. The substance can even be aerosolized and absorbed into the lungs. In its purest form, it is believed that the quantities obtained from a single castor bean could put an end to the lives of 1,000 people. On the other hand, the efficacy of ricin is not the factor that makes it such a nightmare. The absence of antidotes is another factor. The fact that ricin can be prepared by anyone who has access to a coffee grinder and some fundamental knowledge of chemistry is not the issue. Rather, the issue is how incredibly simple it is to produce naturally present in the seeds. As a consequence of this, it has been one of the compounds that has been one of the most alluring to governments and bioterrorists who are wanting to wreak devastation for a very long time. For use as a weapon since the beginning of time. Today, we are going to relate the story of ricin, nature's perfect poison, by describing it in terms of everyday home items that are actually nightmare murder machines. Ricinius communists, which is the scientific name for the cost of being plants rice, are nothing short of a nightmare or a violent group. There is nothing else that could beat them. India's communist is a plant that can be found growing in several parts of the world, particularly in tropical conditions. Additionally, it may be found in a great number of gardens in the United States, where it is prized for its simple cultivation and attractive coloration. And this is something of a mine, because it also produces one of the most lethal toxins that have ever been discovered by man, which can be found inside the seeds of plants that are considered to be plants. The BFG was the antagonist of the Doom franchise, and ricin is the poison that he serves. Ricin is a toxin that attaches itself to cells and prevents them from producing proteins. For this reason, it is the ultimate shortcut for simply killing everyone. It is because of this that infected cells die in large numbers, which results in a wide range of terrible side effects for the animal that they are a part of, and ultimately results in death, which is the most severe of all the side effects. At this time, there is no known antidote, and the only thing that doctors can do for you is try to alleviate your symptoms, cross their fingers, and hope for the best. In light of the fact that consuming as few as 2 castor beans could result in the accumulation of rice in your system to the point where you die, this is nothing short of horrifying. But the good news is that accidental poisoning from ricin is not as common as one might. Instead of covering the seeds, resin is discovered by pulping castor beans and sorting out the various compounds that are released throughout the process. In most cases, this is the time when the cast of beans is mashed in order to produce castor oil. This is a process that takes place on a massive scale every year without ever resulting in the death of anyone. If you are a careless parent with a toddler who is determined to utilize anything and everything, this is wonderful news for you, because it indicates that merely swallowing a cast of bean is almost probably not going to kill you. Chewing the seed, on the other hand, is what causes the rice to be released and what makes it so lethal. Occasionally, this leads to adolescents who chew on their bracelets being admitted to the hospital. This occurs in Latin America, when cast of beans are painted and fashioned into jewelry. However, the most horrifying situation is when someone intends to purposely poison you. The chances of you accidentally killing yourself with rice are quite low. The only time things get truly terrifying is when someone wants to poison you. If someone wants to kill someone with anthrax, they will first need to discover the spores, and then they will need to receive an advanced degree in microbiology in order to obtain the knowledge necessary to weaponize them. Rice, on the other hand, is really simple to produce at home. Ricin poison, any would be the case. After mashing the beans in their coffee grinds, the only step to obtaining a lethal poison is to master chromatography, which is a method that any chemistry undergrad could walk you through and is familiar with. All it needs to do is make a quick trip to the market and get castor beans and a few other popular things. there is no way that we are going to delve any farther into the specifics of that matter. This is not intended to be used as evidence in any future federal case. Rather, it is intended to serve as a piece of Exhibit A. It is very much appreciated. All right, that being said, we have witnessed how incredibly simple it is for someone to produce Ricin. In the event that they poisoned you with it, the question that naturally arises: what would happen? If you have a stomach that isn't very strong, you should probably turn away now, since the answer to that question is going to be where things start to get pretty uncomfortable. Rice can be poisonous in 3 different ways, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention: by ingesting it, by being injected with it, and by inhaling it. Ingestion is the most common method. The intricacies of those lively hugs are extremely varied from one another, despite the fact that each is about as entertaining as a porcupine enema. The first and most obvious method of introducing it into your system is the one we will discuss. Ingestion is the most common cause of poisoning among all situations. By a wide margin, this is the most typical. Within a few hours of being poisoned, or even carelessly chewing on some castor beans, you would start to feel sick. This could be the most unpleasant experience you have ever had. This would be followed by severe cramping in the stomach region, followed by vomiting, and finally, bloody diarrhea within the digestive tract. The reason would be to launch an assault on the cells, then kill them, so forcing them to perish in a genocide on a microscopic scale. On the other hand, the damage would not end there. As the poison made its way into your bloodstream, it would reach other organs and do damage to them. Failure of the liver, failure of the kidneys, and even failure of the central nervous system are all possibilities. Nevertheless, unintentional rice and ingestion only leads in death approximately 6 of the time. In spite of this, the agony would continue to be excruciating. On the other hand, if someone truly intended to kill you, they most likely employed the subsequent method. Injection has been the preferred form of rice and delivery for assassins for a very long time, and there is a significant reason for this. In contrast to consuming rice and injecting, it does not immediately result in cramping and vomiting that produces a projectile motion. To your good fortune, the first thing you would sense is discomfort surrounding the puncture wound as the ricin assaults. You would experience general weakness and dizziness, but it wouldn't be until nearly half a day had gone that the symptoms would really strike you. The muscle itself would cause necrosis of the flesh phase, which is why you should avoid Googling within the first 5 hours. After then, your body would become a raft that is being tossed around in a storm of fever, headaches, vomiting, and decreasing blood pressure for around 1 in 5 people, in spite of the fact that it ultimately results in multiple organ failure and death. This storm eventually passes for 83 of those who were injected. In the field of biodefense, it is indeed the final type of rice and exposure that causes people to feel the most worry. This is due to the fact that rice was ingested, and the only possible explanation is an act of terror. On the other hand, inhaling the poison will not result in the failure of many organs of the body, in contrast to eating or being injected with rice. The rice, on the other hand, will settle into your lungs and assault them with a single-minded efficiency, destroying them as certainly as if you had inhaled napalm. You would start to have pain in your chest within a few hours. If you were to develop symptoms similar to the flu, such as a cough, your lungs would fill with fluid, making it hard for you to breathe. By the time a day had passed, your blood pressure would have dropped, and it would almost definitely be that you had passed away, due to the fact that there are literally no incidents or records of individuals passing away as a result of inhaling rice. And because experiments have been conducted on animals, we say that it is probably sure. However, to the best of our knowledge, no human being has ever brought rice into their lungs. The fact that this is the case takes us to one of the few pieces of positive news regarding this lethal poison. It is not particularly useful for use in attacks that result in a large number of casualties, although refined rice and castor beans have the potential to kill 1,000 people, according to theory. When applied on such a large scale, It is just not cost-effective. To put it another way, if you wanted to cover an area that was 100 square kilometers in size with an aerosolized virus, you would only require 1 kilogram of anthrax. On the other hand, you would be required to acquire 4 tons of rice, and a word of caution. Purchasing 4 tons of castor beans is almost certainly going to put you on a watch list with the FBI. Indeed, despite the fact that rice is not a cost-effective weapon when used in large quantities, it is nonetheless an enticing weapon. Since the beginning of time, a great number of people have utilized it to eliminate a great number of their adversaries in the most hideous manners that can possibly be imagined. A cave with the name Border Cave may be found in Whitney, which is located on the border between South Africa and East Africa. The name is extremely uninspired. However, despite the fact that its name might seem uninteresting, the contents of the book are anything but. Border Cave, which is considered to be one of the best preserved archaeological sites, has produced one-of-a-kind items that date back 2,000 years of human history. Nevertheless, in the context of the video that we are watching today, it is primarily interesting for a particular discovery. The first one dates back to approximately 22,000 BC, a discovery that supports the hypothesis that humans have been using resin to poison one another ever since the beginning of time. It is a wooden stick with a notched end that is the object in issue. It was once believed to be nothing more than a nice old stick from the past, when it was discovered for the first time in the 1970s. On the other hand, it was determined that the stick contained residues of ricin after it was subjected to a chemical examination in the 2010s. At this point in time, it is believed that ancient peoples utilized this stick to coat their arrowheads with the poison, as well as traditional forms of ricin injection. Despite the fact that the idea is chilling, it might not come as a surprise to learn that our predecessors attempted to transform the common castor bean into a weapon of some kind. After all, that is precisely what a great many of contemporary governments have attempted to accomplish. Peter Herman Still, Mark was the first person in the history of the world to successfully extract and isolate ricin. This accomplishment occurred in the year 1888. On the other hand, before to this, the toxin had been utilized mostly by toxic, but now it was feasible to bypass the process of slipping someone castor bean mulch and proceed directly to ricin. People soon became highly interested in the matter since there was a problem caused by the fact that the expense of being plants had already spread everywhere. Not so long ago, it was discovered that castor oil served as an excellent lubricant for train engines, which resulted in a significant increase in the efficiency of these engines. That resulted in an increase in the cultivation of rice all over the world in communist zones. Therefore, when the news of Stillman's discovery became public, governments were all like, wait, these extremely common plants that we have lying around could be used to make a weapon that none of our adversaries had done before. During World War I, when the United States Entente and the Central Powers were already firing poison gas at one another, the first significant effort was made to transform rice into a bioweapon. Scientists working at the experimental station at American University started thinking out how to take things to the next level. Ricin was a significant topic of investigation in that study. There were two unique versions of the American strategy for the poison. The first thing that needed to be done was to find a means to coat bullets in it, which would then raise the level of insanity. This would be the modern counterpart of those ancient tribes dipping their arrowheads in the poison. The one and only problem was that ricin can be destroyed by high temperatures, which meant that firing such bullets would render them unusable. Therefore, the United States of America resorted to a different approach, which involved the production of a lethal dust cloud. Do you remember when we mentioned that breathing ricin was a very unpleasant experience? Best of luck, the United States of America had the intention of inflicting it on Central Powers, which consisted of soldiers on a massive scale. It was planned that ricin would be ground into a powder that was extremely fine, and then it would be dispersed through the air over the battlefields. With the exception of mustard gas, The only thing that is currently connected with World War I is Ricin dust. This is due to the fact that the military changed their minds when it became apparent that there were no antidotes available before anybody could convince them to proceed. At long last, the conflict was over. In the flurry of international accords that followed, resin was blacklisted alongside other bio and chemical agents. I suppose that's all there is to it. Following the conclusion of World War I, all nations complied with these conventions in a courteous manner, and no government ever again engaged in any form of maltreatment of resin. You are about to be in for a bit of a surprise, if that is what you believe, because we are about to see what happens. It is expected that the 20th century would be filled with states that attempt to utilize Ricin as a weapon. Regrettably, some of them would even reach their goals. There are more horrifying accounts of Ricin in modern history that are about to be presented. To begin, however, I would like to share a brief message from today's sponsor, CuriosityStream. A subscription streaming service known as CuriosityStream provides users with access to thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles produced by some of the most renowned filmmakers in the world, including original content that is exclusive to the site. Compare it to Hulu or Netflix for nerds. Think of it as the latter. Users who are interested in history can access CuriosityStream on a wide variety of platforms and web applications, such as Roku, Android, Xbox One, smart TVs, iOS, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Amazon Kindle, and Apple TV. In other words, it is available pretty much everywhere. It is also accessible in every region of the world, and it is continually updated with fantastic content that is relevant to the current moment. For instance, in response to the requests that I see in the comment section of these movies, they decided to include a documentary titled Secret Nazi Weapons this spring. I have a feeling that you guys are going to feel the same way about that one. If on the other hand, you are going to love today's video on the extremely terrifying subject of reason, then perhaps you will also enjoy the 3-part series Pain Plus and Poison that is available on CuriosityStream. It's wonderful, absolutely terrifying. The show is a mini-series. You have to go to curiositystream.com and then /bargraphics in order to have unrestricted access to the best documentaries and non-fiction series from across the world. Additionally, if you use the promotional code provided by Graphics right now, you will be able to save 25% the price of a yearly subscription, which will cost just $14.99 for the entire year. Again, curiositystream.com is offering a discount of 25% off of $14.99 for the entire year on /biographics. After that, let's return to the Rising Chronicles, shall we? The 7th of September 1978 was the day that Georgy Markov resigned from his position at the BBC World Service in London and made his way toward Waterloo Bridge. During the height of the Cold War, the Bulgarian writer and satirist Markov had been placed in the leadership of the Communist Party in his country. However, he later defected from the Communist Party. At this point, he was residing in England, and it was from there that he broadcast critical critiques of the Bulgarian government. In addition to the fact that Markov had already survived 2 attempts on his life, the work was extremely hazardous. He was not the only one either. Just 2 weeks previously, Vladimir Kostov, another Bulgarian dissident, had been sent to a hospital in Paris with an unexplained illness that had almost taken his life. On the other hand, if Markov had been on the watch for assassins on that warm autumn day, it is quite unlikely that he would have been able to adequately prepare himself for what was to come while he was waiting at a bus stop. When the playwright turned around, he saw a man with an umbrella, muttering an apology and getting into a taxi. The playwright felt a severe ache in his leg. It was a rather insignificant occurrence, one that has the potential to be quickly forgotten. Additionally, it was during these moments when Markov's destiny was decided. The following night, Markov started experiencing muscle cramps and fever, and the area on his leg where the guy had bumped him with the umbrella was in a lot of discomfort. Both weak and dizzy, he felt. Just the day after that, Georgy Markov was admitted to the hospital, unable to determine what was wrong with him and how to help him. At first, the medical professionals thought that he was suffering from some strange sickness. Having watched this video, however, you are already able to make an educated estimate as to what was actually taking place. At the time, the individual who was standing at the bus stop was employed by the Bulgarian secret police. His umbrella had been equipped with a weapon that had been designed in conjunction with the KGB. This weapon had the capability of blasting a very small pellet out of its tip and into the skin of a victim. We are referring to the minuscule. With a diameter of only about 1.5 millimeters, the pellet that was now stuck in Markov was very little, so minuscule, you can observe that it was unable to cause any harm to his surroundings, if not for the little hole that was there on its surface, a hole that contained a couple of milligrams of rice that had been purified and was sealed with wax that was supposed to melt once it was ingested by a particular individual. Within a few minutes following being put into Mark, that pellet had already delivered its lethal dose. At this point, there was nothing that needed to be done. At the time of Markov's death on September 11th, at the age of 49, he had been poisoned by resin, but the medical professionals were unaware that resin was the cause of his death. It was not until the pellets were discovered during an autopsy that it became apparent that Scotland Yard was dealing with an assassination. It wasn't until the early 1990s, when communism had finally collapsed in Eastern Europe, that the truth about Markov's death was eventually established. Even then, it had been a surprise. Even to this day, the murder of Markov continues to be the most high-profile incidence of resin poisoning in the history of the world. Nevertheless, he was not the first person to suffer this fate during the Cold War. In fact, he was not even close to being the only one. There was another Bulgarian in Paris who had been suddenly ill just 2 weeks before Markov. However, after Markov had passed away, the medical staff returned to inspect a minor puncture wound that was located on his back. Inside, they discovered a metal pellet that was identical to the one they had seen outside. The fact that the increase in dose and cost of pellets has been just beneath the thresholds that are considered to be fatal is a complete and utter coincidence. It wasn't simply the Bulgarians who were affected. During that time period, he found himself joking around with Ricin. A severe ache was felt above Boris Kozak's kidney in 1981, when he was shopping in a store in Virginia. Kozak was a communist Polish spy and an asset of the Central Intelligence Agency. Within hours, he became gravely ill with symptoms that were comparable to those of Markov. Fortunately, in contrast to Markov, he found a way to survive. As a result of these 3 failed efforts at assassination, resin was removed off the list of options for eliminating dissidents. Instead, more exotic chemicals such as polonium were used, rather than Novichok. However, at the same time as governments were beginning to turn their backs on the poison, another frightening type of group was becoming very interesting. It is now time that we confront the terrorists from resin. Although the idea had been brought up for the first time during World War I, it wasn't until the Second World War that anyone took significant efforts in developing resin powder that could be inhaled. The United States of America started conducting experiments with rice and dust at the Dugway Proving Broken in Utah in 1944. At that time, the substance was referred to as Agent W. The experiments progressed quite a bit by spraying a type of agent, WW, that could be broken down to an extremely fine powder. Everything was prepared and ready to go. But it wasn't long before the Americans ran into the major problem that resin posed as a military weapon. The scientists had hoped that it might be sprayed out of planes over Germany, but it wasn't long before they ran into the dilemma. On the other hand, there are poisons that are significantly more cost-effective. Therefore, they gave up on their research in the same way that the British and French would give up on theirs, and in the same way that Iraq would give up on its aim to become a producer of rice and weapons in the 1980s. However, The findings of all of this research definitively established one truth: that cannot be changed. Powdered ricin that could be breathed in was extremely lethal, and it might not be useful for killing hundreds of people all at once. But if you set your ambitions a little lower, if your primary objective was to generate widespread fear with deaths as a bonus, then all of a sudden, inhalable ricin was looking very enticing. The first people to attempt to ride on this bandwagon were the radicals on the far right in the United States. In 1991, the federal authorities foiled a scheme to assassinate United States Marshals by using rice that was either absorbed via the skin or inhaled. As a result, 4 individuals who were plotting against the government were eliminated. During the subsequent decade, a number of more members of militia groups were apprehended for either possessing ricin or attempting to manufacture it. On the other hand, it wasn't until the 21st century that ricin became a major phenomenon in the American nightmare machine. There were sirens that went off at a postal processing facility in South Carolina just 2 years earlier, on October 15, 2003. In the autumn of 2001, letters, which contained anthrax, immobilized the United States postal system, causing 17 individuals to become ill and 5 people to lose their lives. Immediately following the attacks on the Marathon, the United States of America had made enormous investments in the screening of mail for biological pollutants, and now those investments were beginning to pay off. It was on that day that a letter was placed in isolation at the facility in South Carolina. A little metal vial and 2 typewritten notes were found inside the enclosure. Caution was a helpful declaration made by the first one. Without the appropriate protection, the rice and poison that are contained within the old container cannot be opened. The second person described the assault as a demand, referring to the person who was being attacked as an angel. They pledged to make Washington, D.C. into the ruins of a town, unless, of course, the government decides to remove the new restrictions regarding interstate trucking. Hold on. Wait just a second, shall we? As it turns out, the first Ricin letter attack in the history of the United States was carried out by a person who was extremely aggravated by relatively modest modifications to federal shipping standards. This is a very insignificant matter. One of the fallen angels that caused the most alarm was an increase of 2 hours in the amount of sleep time that is legally permitted for long-distance drivers. It is at this point that we get to one of the most peculiar elements of ricin, which is the ease with which it may be manufactured. Not only does it draw governments and terrorists, but it also attracts clever people. People who, if they attempted to create a bomb, would definitely blow their own hands off, but who are nevertheless capable of rushing to the shop and purchasing some castor beans in a pack of envelopes are also drawn to it. Fruitcakes, loonies, and weirdos are also drawn to it. On the other hand, despite the fact that this season of production raises the probability of fools becoming involved in bioterrorism, it also implies that writing letters is a significantly less problematic endeavor than letters that contain anthrax itself. It was discovered in a postal processing facility at the White House a few days after the letter from South Carolina that another rice envelope addressed to a deceased angel was discovered. After a few months had passed, in February of 2004, ricin powder that had been allegedly taken from an envelope that had ruptured were discovered in an office building on Capitol Hill. Considering how terrifying this must have been for the personnel, you can imagine how decontaminated they must have been. After then, everything was over. There was a complete absence of correspondence from fallen angel. There will be no attempts made to transform Washington, D.C. into a ghost town. Whenever the trucking laws that had been the source of inspiration for the attack were repealed. In the end, the ricin letters that were sent out in 2003 did not cause anyone to feel unwell and did not result in anyone's death. All the same, this did not prevent other people from doing it once more in the very near future. It's because there is just no way that we can recount the narrative of the 2013 Ricin letters without it sounding as ridiculous as hell. We are about to turn the story of a deadly toxin into an absurdist comedy This is something that does not happen very frequently, but it is that which is about to happen here. In spite of the fact that it was maybe the most incompetent set of bioterrorism strikes ever carried out. At the beginning of the year 2013, on April 15th, the story of the letters began in a rather dim manner. Alarms were triggered at the Capitol when a letter that was sent to Republican Senator Roger Wicker tested positive for rice in the news. This news emerged on the same very day that pressure cooker bombs exploded in the Boston Marathon, which raised the possibility of a coordinated sequence of assaults. A second letter, this one addressed to Barack Obama, was found to be positive 2 days after the initial test. It appears that a terrorist cell may be planning to create widespread destruction in the United States. However, after that, things started to take an odd turn. Additionally, a local judge in Dottie, Mississippi, who is an unlikely target for any international terrorist, was the recipient of a letter that was sent recently. The letters themselves were another factor to consider. "I am Casey, and I give my approval to this message," was the sentence that concluded each one. "I am Casey, and I give my approval to this message." The federal government performed some Googling, and it shows that "I am Casey." Is it possible that an Elvis impersonator from a small town utilized the sign-off? This is Paul Kevin Curtis. But I suppose it's much more insane than that. In spite of the fact that Curtis was taken into custody, the FBI swiftly discovered that he had not sent the rice in via mail. On the contrary, the letters were sent by a local karate instructor who harbored a grudge against Curtis, who was a hit on the Elvis tour. The letters were intended to implicate Curtis for terrorist act. Indeed, that is a real sentence that I felt compelled to express at this very moment. James Everett Dutschke was taken into custody not long after he attempted to get rid of a coffee grinder that had a positive ricin test result. He was down for a quarter of a century. After some time had passed, it became clear that the item that caused him to lose his composure was Curtis's fabricated assertion that he was a member of Mensa. For some strange reason, Dutschke was not the only insane person who sent rice during that spring. After a month had passed, yet another batch of tainted letters was discovered while they were being delivered to President Obama. Shannon Richardson, an actress who has appeared in a few episodes of The Walking Dead and The Vampire Diaries, was the person who was responsible for them. But instead of turning them become bioterrorists or sending them to frame her agent ex-husbands, as one newspaper pointed out in a sarcastic manner, she had sent them. In the present day, a disagreement between spouses escalates into a full-scale attack on the White House by a bioterrorist. Take a look at what we mean when we say that ricin attracts fruitcakes. In the years that have passed since the G2013, the phrase "clown fast rice and powder" has made an appearance on the news on occasion, sometimes in more terrifying settings and other times in more humorous ones. At the more terrifying end of the spectrum is the Cologne plot that occurred in 2008, in which a terrorist inspired by ISIS was apprehended with bombs and rice, and he was responsible for the deaths of scores of people who were less common. One example is the Quebec woman who attempted to send rice to Donald Trump in the mail in the year 2020. Her intention was to convince him to withdraw from the race for the presidency. To say that that letter did not make it to the president's desk today is an understatement. In addition, despite the fact that ricin is extremely toxic, it is most commonly connected with lonely weirdos who have witnessed an excessive amount of broken, terrible weirdos and have a desire for attention or a grudge against them. In other instances, it has been utilized in each and every one of the bioterrorism attacks that have taken place within the United States of America, and it has failed horribly, resulting in the death of no one. Nevertheless, despite the fact that it can be enticing to write about it, the toxin is not much more than a joke. It would be a dumb thing to do. One of the reasons why military are drawn to ricin is because it was used for assassinations by communist agents. There is a good rationale for this. Our African forefathers dipped their arrows in it for a good cause, as this is the explanation. When it was tens of thousands of years ago, let us not forget that ricin is one of the most perfect poisons that have ever been discovered. It is a toxin that has no known antidote. Following your death, that leaves very little trace behind. If idiot karaoke instructors were to get their hands on it, it would undoubtedly be a terrible bioweapon. On the other hand, if you put it in the hands of someone who is knowledgeable about what they are doing, you will see how lethal it can be. It is possible that Anthony Fauci, who opens an envelope in the middle of the year 2020 and discovers that he is covered in a mystery white powder, should be the one to say the final word on this matter.